Lexington Lyceum Advocates special program today. I'm Kathleen Dalton, I'm chair of the research committee, and we have been working on various programs. Sometimes we talk about the Robbins family, the founders of the Stone Building. Sometimes we have talked about abolitionism. We've done various kinds of programs. We did an international fun fair here that our president, Mark Manasses, planned and ran. We had 300 or 400 people around the Stone Building. That was very exciting. So we've been working on programs, but our purpose in gathering our group and new audiences is to get the Stone Building reopened as a community center, as a place to talk about history education, to build a new Lyceum movement, which is to have public conversations about current issues and all kinds of things. To continue the work that Eli Robbins did with his family. Julia Robbins certainly helped him plan. All the speakers came to the Stone Building. And we hope to revive that Lyceum movement and to be a community service for the town of Lexington and nearby towns. So that's our aspiration, and we have been working on it for about 5 years now. So we're clear about our purposes, and we're delighted to see you today. I just want to say that this building is an addition, and Eli Robbins in the 1830s built the Stone Building for the sake of an East Lexington religious possibility, but also for speaking. He never said exactly why he did it, but clearly they had current speakers. And he brought his friend Charles Follen to be the minister, and he gave land here. Eli Robbins gave the land that became Follen Church. Charles Follen, who's another abolitionist, designed the Octagon original building, which is an extraordinary, beautiful building. And the two buildings are really sister buildings because they came out of the same 1830s movement of trying to reform American society, having a more diverse religious community, because the past had been a unitary Puritan village here, and they were trying to work on religious pluralism in a kind of Protestant way, which is no more Catholics than Jews yet. We're not opening up the floodgates entirely, but they would eventually welcome East Lexington. It's known for being the first synagogue and a place where Catholics could worship later in the century. So religious pluralism, reform, women's rights, and being willing to entertain new ideas. So we feel our Lexington Lyceum advocates, we feel a real affinity with the founders, and we also have this relationship between Follen Church and the Stone Building. And thank you, Follen Church and Rosemary Trowbridge, for getting us the room today, because this is air conditioned and really much better. I was this is the third year when we've been trying to do walking tours, and it is hard on Mass Avenue, so this is much better. And I think we're thrilled to be here. I have a few other thank yous. Andrea and Tom from Waterstone, gathering your troops. The Lexington Historical Society archivists have been invaluable to us. We love working with you. We are honored today that Mary Keenan, who's the author of the wonderful book about Julia Robbins, which is the best source, and we have one for sale today, but we urge people to read that book because it's a really wonderful depiction of what it was like to grow up as a young girl in an abolitionist family at a particular moment when there were many constraints on women's lives and men's lives too. So today we have a great opportunity. Our wonderful intern, Amelia Settembre, who's made my past 2 summers so much more fun, is going to talk a little bit about what it meant in this Victorian world of the 1830s to be in this Robbins family. Often I'll give talks about their public activities, and they're upset about the kidnappers and the days of danger. That's kind of my public story that I tell about the Robbins family. But Amelia's looking at the inside of the family and three people who don't often get talked about. How did Victorians who had more divided senses of gender than their colonial ancestors, and who defined women as angels of the house, and men as people who should throw themselves into the competitive industrial workplace. That's different, and that's new in this time period. So what does that mean in the family? Does it mean that mom in a family is going to say to her daughters, well, we believe in women's education and we're reformers, but you better come home and take care of me when I'm old? Amelia, we're honored today, actually, not only to have Mary Keenan here, but also Tony Rotundo has written one of the most important path-breaking books about what it was like to be a man in the 19th century. So I just have to recognize that he's here. And so we have a lot of scholars in Lexington, and we're lucky. Okay, please join me in welcoming Amelia.
Hello everyone. As Kathy has introduced, my name is Amelia Settembre, and I'm going to be talking today about unorthodox Victorian approaches to life and love. So for me, this means a couple of things. The first one I'm going to focus on is the disabilities and how those were treated at the time, specifically deafness. Then talk a little bit about, well, I think I have a slide about what I'm going to do, so maybe I should just go ahead and pull that up. Here we go. So first I want to do a quick overview of the Robbins family and the stone building, just to sort of give you guys a contextual grounding. Then disability in the Victorian period, which could actually sort itself into two different categories. The first one is physical disability, but the second one would be a mental disability, whether you count this as a mental illness, learning disability, or some other form that would impact people's everyday lives. And finally, I would like to talk about unconventional lives and loves. So this will look at sexuality across the board, as well as gender nonconformity, as seen in these very strict Victorian ideals. So first up, a little bit about the Robbins family. I think Kathy pretty much covered this on the stone building, but I just wanted to make sure that the information is up here once more, and there's a picture of it. It is, of course, physically right outside. There is the address, should you want to go look it up on Google. It was constructed in 1833 by Eli Robbins to serve as a lyceum, a gathering place, and a center of intellectual advancement, and it was, like Kathy said, alongside the same movement that developed the Follen Church. All right. So in terms of the Robbins family, I just want to give a context because Lot Robbins, right in the center there, is one of the main people I'm going to be telling you about today. So Abigail Winship, the Winships were a very wealthy family here in East Lexington. They had much land. And Stephen Robbins married to Abigail Winship. So the two of them together had a family. They had many children, more than just these three. But Eli Robbins is the father of the central Robbins family, and he, of course, marries Hannah Simons. Then Lot Robbins, he is the sixth child of Abigail and Stephen, and Lot, meanwhile, lives his life for about 30 or so years before he is committed to McLean Hospital, where he lives out the remainder of his life for the next 50 years. And Kyra Robbins, I hope I'm saying that correctly, and I'm sure I'm not, is here, and she as well had strong ties to Eli Robbins and Hannah Simons. So you see her mentioned a lot in letters by the children of Eli and Hannah. And then this was one of the houses in which some of the Robbins family lived. I believe it was initially down the street a little bit, about a block or two, I would say, but not all of it still remains. Some of it has been moved over down Mass Ave a little bit, And that still has a sign on the side of it which says this used to be part of the Robbins house, or this was, and it's been moved down Massachusetts Avenue. Now, the more immediate Robbins family, these are the main children of Eli and Hannah. You have Hannah Mariah, who was the oldest, and she was also deaf. And so she is another person who I'm hoping to tell you a lot about today. I'm excited about that. Then you have Abigail, one of the older sisters. Ellen, who is, of course, the mother of School Board Ellen, who does amazing things for the town of Lexington and the school board. Julia, who Mary Keenan wrote her wonderful book on, and I cannot recommend that enough. And finally, Eli Jr. So the next sort of thing I want to talk about is the angel of the house. And this is worth mentioning because it shows up in poetry as a very common motif that you would see during the period. So not only is it this very strict role that women are expected to inhabit, I have two poems pulled up here. The first one is Richard Cox, as you can see right here. He's junior, I guess. And it is, I think I'm gonna, Kathy, will you be willing to read this one? In a moment. There's one more thing I want to say about the other one. There is a second book that was published called Angel in the House. Lots of fun when you're trying to look up Angel of the House and you get the other one and you're like, oh no. And that was written by Coventry Patmore about his wife, Emily Andrews, because this guy had determined that his wife just embodied every single feminine ideal by, I guess, bending over backwards and doing whatever he said. But he liked that so much that then he went on to write 2 full books in epic poem style about how good his wife was at doing that. So he published it. It's actually in the Penguin Classics collection, so in case you were wondering if this is something they deemed worthy of continuing to pass around, the answer is yes. And you can only imagine the cultural impact such a thing had. However, the Richard Cox one is much shorter. So that's the one I will have Kathy read to you today.
We have an angel in our home, a bright and happy one, with hair as golden as the clouds around the setting sun. Her eyes are like the stars that gem the beauty of the night, and over all her face they shed an exquisite delight. We have an angel in our home, and lovingly at morn she twines her rosy arms about our little eldest born. To say we love her would be ill, our feelings fond express. We gaze upon her and we feel a wealth of tenderness. We have an angel in our home, and every evening we have taught her in a sweet trustfulness to bend the willing knee. And thus we have a blessedness beneath our humble dome, our little winsome baby girl, the angel of our home. Such is the angel of our home, the bright and happy one, with hair as golden as the clouds around the setting sun. Then wonder not if we should pray beneath our humble dome, that God in mercy bless away the angel of our home.
Thank you so much. That was wonderful. The poem itself was. Imagine this being instituted today, though, someone going around and saying, yeah, you know what's great for our young girl children is they're just going to willingly bend the knee. You know, that's what I want for my kids. So as you can see, our conception of things has shifted over time, but this was the going view that you had. This is what was expected. So whenever we're thinking about what constitutes even gender nonconformity when it comes to women, you have to remember that this is the standard that they were even working from to begin with. Now, the Robbins family was interesting for this reason because they did educate their daughters, and they did send them to school, and they did have them learn, which was not necessarily common for girls in that era. What they did have was finishing schools, and finishing schools would teach a young girl how to be a good wife, and then that is what would continue to happen for the remainder of her life. But as I will talk about in a minute, you see more paths that are available to young women than just that, but this is what was being reinforced. This was what was expected to happen. So I would like to get into the deafness and disability section, because I find this very interesting, and I'm going to be talking about Hannah Maria Robbins. Hannah Maria Robbins was the eldest child of the Robbins family, and like I had said before, she was indeed deaf. So what this meant was her life had a much different trajectory than that of her sisters, who were all hearing, who were able to attend school more readily, and who had a different method of learning. Now, deafness in general typically had strict laws around it, and stricter views beforehand. Like, for example, in England, in the 1600s, you have primogeniture, which is the idea that your firstborn son is able to get the property and money and wealth and whatever that the parents have. And so if your eldest son was deaf, primogeniture would pass to the next son. It was a completely eliminating condition that could get you basically kicked out of the family will. So then we have the 1800s, the start of the 1800s. And you have Thomas Gallaudet, which again, I'm sure I'm saying wrong. Yikes, should have checked that before I did this. But essentially, he is going to figure out how to teach a young deaf girl. And he's looking around for methods, and there's no form of deaf education that happens in the United States. However, they have something going in Europe. So you can guess where Thomas is going to go. He's going to go to Europe, and he has to figure out, how do we teach deaf children? There, he meets Laurent Clerc. And so Clerc, in this case, was a deaf Frenchman, and he was in attendance at school. He had gone to university. He was an educator. And Thomas met him, and he said, hey, listen, you know how to educate deaf children. So there's a whole sign language. They're able to communicate. This is, sure, still seen as weird because it's the 1800s, but at least we've recognized that there's something here that we can work with. So Thomas says, I have a great idea. Laurent, come back to the United States with me, and let's set up a deaf school in the United States and start working with sign language. So Clerc's teacher actually doesn't want to relinquish him, and he makes Laurent sign something that promises that he is going to return. Now, I can tell you how that happened. He actually never went back and remained in the United States for the next 50 to 60 years of his life. But you know, there was the offer that he would, in fact, perhaps return. So Gallaudet and Clerc go on down to Connecticut, where they establish the American School for the Deaf. Now, this had all kinds of different names. For example, it was indeed called the American Asylum. They've changed it over the years, and now this is what it's called. But it was the first one established in the United States, and it was accessible to anybody across New England, and it was set up in, of course, 1821. So you have people in New England who now can send their children there. And in fact, different states have money set aside that they are willing to give people to help afford tuition at the American School for the Deaf so that their children can get an education here. So the next question is, what would this education even look like? And the answer is they do develop a sign language, which is very derivative from French Sign Language. So that's where American Sign Language comes from, because you're working directly with whatever Laurent could remember, and then whatever he made up or changed to suit the American audiences. And you have documentation of him going in front of legislatures and saying, look, we have to make sure that we're educating people. Deaf people are perfectly capable of learning, and there is no reason that we should be excluding them from this knowledge, from this ability to live their lives. But there was a necessity to do this because there were early cultural views of deafness. Now, this is sort of an interesting thing that gets into the crosshairs between race a little bit and then also deafness and how these things were perceived. Because it's not that sign languages did not exist, it's that they didn't exist in these Western communities. And what they did exist in was Native Americans. So I will admit that there's some language today on these that is offensive that we don't use anymore. For example, we'd probably say Native Americans, and the term deaf and dumb is considered very offensive, and so we don't say it. The reason why they used it, though, was because there was this base idea to equate the ability to speak and to use language in a standard way with one's intelligence. And so you would see people categorized as dumb if they couldn't speak in the same way everyone else could, or so that could even go with people who had some sort of mental disability that made it hard to talk. If someone was stuttering or had some other form of speech impediment, or if they were deaf and they weren't able to verbally communicate. So all of this to say, you have this preconceived notion that intelligence is derivative upon communication. And you have a statement here, for example, where it's describing them going to see a tribe of Native Americans and that they communicate by sign. And so these are the things that are being published in newspapers. And so you have people who already sort of view Native Americans as savages to some degree, and they're equating sign language with that particular culture. So even from the get-go, despite the fact that sign language is an incredible resource for people who are deaf, this is very hard to deal with when this is the information that's circulating, right? Because now you have this sort of confusion. So there's even a book up there. This was done in 1819, 1820. It's The Expedition from Pittsburgh to the Rocky Mountains by Major Stephen H. Long. And he describes over 200 different signs that the Native American tribe used. They ran with them, they were spending time together, and he recorded down the list how to do all of these signs. So I think that's really interesting as a resource we have. Then into early deaf instruction, not destruction, oh my goodness. You have this. So this is Samuel Ackerley. Samuel Ackerley was one of the people who pioneered resources for deaf individuals. And he published this manual, which, by the way, if you're curious about it, is available on the Internet Archive for free. You can peruse it. It's fascinating. It says that there are three principal parts for words. One of them for upset is upsought. I believe that's the participle form, not that that matters. But we don't use it anymore, so it's very out of date. If you'd like to see how language has changed over the years, that's an interesting way. But essentially, Ackerley said, yes, we can educate deaf individuals. Here's what we're going to do. First of all, their first lesson is going to be sign language. So for this, I would like to teach you guys the first 3 letters of the alphabet, as Ackerley would have done for the very first group of people coming into a school for the deaf. So you can also learn to sign your name. A lot of signs are not just spelled out with the letters. I mean, think how much time that would take. They have individual signs. Sign language has its own form of grammar. It is very defined over the years. So in order to make the A, you would want to have your hand sort of in a fist with your thumb up like that. And you would hold it like this if you're signing. This is considered like signing space. So you would usually wear a color that's a flat color, something easy to see, and then you would sign. Whenever you see interpreters, it shows they're going to be wearing something black that's very easy to see through. The next thing you have is the letter B, so you're going to take your palm flat and put this here, your thumb here. There you go, and then a C, like that. So then you're able to sign your name eventually if you were to go through all of this. I won't, because that would take an obscene amount of time. But this was something that was very doable. And you even have examples in the late 18th century. There was a man who was an indentured servant, and he taught the son of his master, the person he was serving, to read and write. So you have documentation that people are perfectly capable of learning. And there are even communities within Massachusetts that have sign language. Like, for example, Martha's Vineyard had an abnormally high deaf population. It was something like 1 in every 25 people were deaf. And so this was in Chilmark. And I think it was that some of the original settlers in a small group were deaf, and then the gene passed down through the ages until you have a large deaf population. So Martha's Vineyard actually has its own set-aside sign language that they use exclusively on the island. And it would have been taught to the children, it was preserved, even the hearing people on the island knew it because this was just how everyone could communicate. Now, we have documentation that once the American School for the Deaf is established, they start sending children from Martha's Vineyard to there instead of having them learn Martha's Vineyard Sign Language. The last speaker died in 1950, and we do not have it preserved. So there are a number of these little sign languages like that. The final thing I want to say in the general context before I get back to Hannah Mariah, because I promise you that although this is very tangential, it is indeed related to her. And so this is the oralist method. So you may be familiar with Alexander Graham Bell, right? He's great on communications, technology. Unfortunately, he also happened to be a eugenicist, and his idea was that he should just like breed out all the deaf people and then deafness would go away forever. Which of course is not necessarily how that works, but he married a deaf woman. He decided that there should be no intermarriages between deaf people. And he in fact decided that what really needed to happen was everyone should just learn to speak, regardless of if they were deaf or hearing. So he made an argument for no more sign language, tried to get it banned from deaf schools, and established this oralist method. So although it looks like he's choking this child out and it's like a reciprocal headlock situation, what's actually happening is they're feeling each other's voice boxes as they're speaking. And so it would be a lot of like seeing how people's lips moved, how it felt to say words and what that meant. And so he's teaching this young child that at this point in time. You see other educational reformers like Horace Mann in Massachusetts, who established the Horace Mann School for the Deaf. He was the first one to establish it in Massachusetts, but he also was an oralist, and so sign language was banned from the premises when he did this. And this rise started to take place around 1850, 1860, and you see it continued on with this expectation that in order to really contribute to society, you have to be able to speak. So the signing method was called manualism, so you see this duality. And it still persists today, but back then it was very class-oriented because the people who could afford to send their children to these schools that taught oralist methods had more money. And the government stopped being willing to support people just willy-nilly sending their kids everywhere. So families would pay out of pocket, and the wealthier families could afford this. And lower class families who weren't able to send their children there had to find some other method that their kids could communicate with them. And so this is where I'll sort of tie in with Hannah Maria, but today you do see it in the deaf community. There's a huge debate about cochlear implants. Is it right to give a child a cochlear implant because that just makes them function as a hearing person, instead of teaching them sign language when there's this hugely established deaf community with which they could partake? Like as a parent, when you're hearing, do you join that community when your child is born deaf, or do you give them an augment that makes them act as a hearing person? So it's still a huge debate that takes place today. What's right? Is it oralism? Is it manualism? And nobody agrees. So in this case, what does that mean for how Hannah Maria's life probably was going? Because we know that she lived at home for the entire time. She wasn't sent, as far as I can tell, to the American School for the Deaf. Even though she would have had the chance to, she was born in time to have gone. And they were accepting pupils all the way from, I think, like 7 years old to 30 years old because they saw such a deficit in deaf education. But it seems like she has signed her name on petitions, which suggests to us that she is at the very least literate, or at the very least able to sign her name. So the question becomes, how did she communicate within her family? And a couple ideas I have, since I couldn't necessarily find anything concrete. So keep in mind, these are theories based on what we know people did. First of all, it's likely that she was able to engage in written communications if she was literate. That was something you could do. Someone could write something to you, pass it over to you, you could read it and respond in turn. Alternatively, and I find this highly likely, a lot of families with deaf individuals in them developed natural home signs. So the idea of a home sign is that only the people within your immediate family understand it. So it would be like, I don't know, if I wanted to have a cat, or I do have a cat, imagine that in this scenario. I have a cat, it's with me, and I need to communicate that in my family because we have someone who's deaf. So maybe I would say that this indicates a cat. And then anytime anyone within the family does that gesture, we know that it's referring to the cat. But the language is so small, it doesn't perpetrate anywhere else. So it's another possibility as well that the town of Lexington had individuals in it who were aware of how to use these signs and how to communicate with her, because she did in fact live in the community, and it doesn't make sense that she would literally be kept inside every single day. I think that's how people go mad. Which, speaking of madness, asylums. Wait, I think I forgot something on this page. Oh, sort of, yeah. Basically just down the side of the lives. You could also be, sent to an asylum, a poor farm, or an almshouse. Not fun places to be, but initially they presented themselves as though they were wonderful. And I think it's sort of absurd that they were called a poor farm. The idea here is that if someone was down and out, or they had some circumstance in their life that they were unable to control or that made their lives difficult, well, you could go to the poor farm. And it was sort of a shelter, kind of. You could stay there for a while, they would take care of you. Of course, the conditions in poor farms and almshouses were not fantastic. They were, of course, sort of breeding grounds for disease. That is a fast way to get sick. But you see all kinds of people being sent to poor farms. A lot of these could be disabled individuals. So if you are born and you're disabled and they decide, well, I didn't want a disabled child, straight to the poor farm with you. Alternatively, they could send you to an orphanage and then you could wind up being there for a while. If you lose all your money, that would send you to the poor farm. If you developed madness at some point, whatever we define madness to be, which is a little bit iffy, then you could go to a poor farm. There's all kinds of reasons why you could end up there. We have documentation that a lot of immigrants did, especially if they weren't able to get property very easily, then they might wind up staying in one of these places. And you have these huge logbooks of everybody who came into a poor farm and the rationale for why they did. Now, eventually, you have things like asylums sort of starting to pop up, in which you have people figuring out, okay, well, what do we do if we have people who are sort of more established mentally ill, and how do we fit into our full understanding? So the idea initially was that these would be places where people could stop for a little while, they would have support. It was not meant to be an extended stay. This was in the initial setups when you have them in the early 1800s. The idea is you go there, you get treatment, it's very humane, it's very nice, right? Because everyone knows that a mental hospital is a very nice place to be. We'd all love to go there. So that was their original setup concept. But then you move into a little bit later on when they start realizing maybe it's a little bit more difficult to do that. But the early asylums, especially early McLean, they had billiards, they had chess, they had games that you could play. There were no real reservations with giving them potentially lethal items to play with. So people had all kinds of things to do. Many of them were just allowed to go out and wander the grounds. As long as they promised to be back, they weren't necessarily chaperoned. It would be like, okay, as long as you come back by 6 p.m. and go to bed in the asylum, then we'll be cool with it. So you saw this very lax policy that then later sort of got strengthened, which happened more towards the 1830s. You see there's this crackdown to be like, okay, you guys can't go wandering around. The rationale given, by the way, on why people can't go around is because that when they leave, they actually wind up becoming more distraught somehow, and then when they return, they're just more unhappy than had they just been locked in the asylum the whole time. Which, I guess if you're given a taste of freedom, right, and then they send you straight back to the asylum, you might not love that. And they would have all kinds of reasons to take patients in. So I'll go through a list of those reasons in a moment. You can see if you personally would be sent to an 1850s asylum. Dorothea Dix, by the way, she was a reformer. She checked some of these places out. And in a lot of cases, what you see is that she determined that they were unethical or that they were doing harm to people. She said McLean was on one of the better sides of these. Now McLean, that doesn't mean they were perfect. They said, oh, we don't use restraints. But you see in their bills and their records that they had actually purchased great deals of restraints, and there is documentation in different cases of them using it. So we can certainly say that they didn't necessarily have those things, but it suggests that yes, they probably were being used to some degree back in the day. And so by the 1840s, you have in the United States 17,000 people who are called feeble-minded. And this is sort of a derivative word that just means incapable of, anything else, or anyone could really wind up in the feeble-minded category, if I'm being honest with you, but only 2K of them were in asylums like this, because it costs money to send someone to an asylum. It's not cheap. You have to pay for their stay. Now, by the time you get to the 1830s, that's where people are starting to say, like, okay, well, maybe we don't just give them short stints. Maybe we just keep people indefinitely in the asylum. They can just keep staying here. And it is an incredible charge on the family, but when they could convince people that this was the only way to fix their family members, that is something that they would do. So, here's Lot Robbins. And we have this very nice picture of him before he was in the asylum. He was born in 1790 and he died in 1874. He was the sixth child of Stephen Robbins and Abigail Winship, and he was admitted first in 1821, then again in 1824, and that is where he spent the next 50 years of his life. So the real question becomes, what happened, right? How did we wind up with this? We've already seen the case of Hannah Mariah, where you have an actually disabled member of the family who does not go to a poor farm, who does not get sent to an asylum, which suggests that what the family considers worthy of sending someone to an asylum is an interesting thing. What is their metric for doing that? So Lot was actually very successful, and as far as I can tell, very loved by his family and by his community. He would go around, he would start dancing schools, and he would allow people to learn to dance. He was in New Hampshire, he was in Maine, he went down to New Jersey. He's traveling around. Each school is about a week or a couple weeks of instruction, and then he goes somewhere else. He's staying at hotels. He's visiting his friends in their houses while he's running these schools. And in his records, you see all kinds of letters where people are like, he is a wonderful teacher, I really appreciate what he's doing, I would recommend him. You see him putting ads in newspapers. So this is a successful man who is doing something that is pretty much appreciated by the community as far as I can tell. And we have no idea what got him in there. But I would like to show you guys something. Hopefully the audio will play. But this is a song that he had. It's called Hull's Victory. I found a fiddle recording that was, I think it's exactly the same music for the most part that's here. And I would like to play it for you because I think it would be wonderful to hear the actual music that Lot would have probably been playing himself. So let's see. Kind of thing that he would have been playing in these schools. He was a violinist. I don't know if they would have called him a fiddler necessarily back in the day, but we see him purchasing a violin and strings, actually two different sets of strings, and a bow and a case. It costs him $37, which today is several $1,000s due to inflation. So it is, oh wait, no it's not. It's $900. What am I talking about? Okay. Back to this. So that's what he's doing. We also see him purchase a trumpet. It's actually an English shorthorn. So more specifically, it is a cornet. So he has music that is written for B flat. I almost brought, well, I did bring my fife in, but I didn't bring the music in. He has music, and I'm pretty sure, a lot of his music is folk tunes, but some of it seems to be original compositions, which he's trying to write over and over again. So we can infer that he was probably a composer on top of playing his fiddle and his horn. And then additionally to that, he has all kinds of basic drum rudiments written out. So he probably also knew the basics of how to play a drum and how to accompany someone. So this guy was very talented. And you start to wonder what else could have happened. So here you have, wake up my presentation. Okay. Here is another such tune, and he would copy these down out of books. So initially I thought, okay, maybe he's writing his original steps. This is a direct copy out of a separate book of steps. The tunes also are things that he could have played. They are traditional American or French folk tunes. And you have steps like this. I've also included a sort of screenshot of another book I found. This isn't one that Lot had, but this is, well, that we physically know that he had. But this is the kind of thing where it would show you where couples are supposed to stand, how they're supposed to dance. You would go to the dancing school, and then at the end, you would have a dance. So he has all these different sets worked out. He has everything written down in terms of how you would go about a dance. And he was consistently hired to do this and typically rehired in the same places, which tends to suggest that he was, in fact, pretty good at it. But whenever he was about 31 years old, I think, he is brought to the McLean Asylum in Somerville. He spends 9 weeks there originally, and then he's freed for a bit, and then he is sent back, of course, for the remainder of his life. So then this raises the question, again, how do you get there? And there are possible answers. For example, it could in fact be mental illness that could send someone to the asylum. I will say though that they had really, again, arbitrary reasons of why someone could go, so it's hard to tell. Another reason that you might be put there is if there's shame to the family, if you're doing something that's potentially illegal, and in order to save you from jail, they send you to the asylum. Is that worse? I don't know, you be the judge of that. Some families didn't think it was worse, and they thought it would be better, in fact, to have them sent over there. Or if you were sometimes involved in a same-sex relationship or had those proclivities, that is another great reason to be sent to the asylum. So these are just some options, and again, we really don't know what the truth is. But in pre-1800s mental health, it wasn't good. The idea was if there was something wrong with you, you were possessed, probably by the devil. So you see that in different cases like the witch trials, where everyone is like, oh no, they're all possessed by the devil and we're gonna have to put them down. Now that's not great, and they didn't really have a conception of, oh, this person's just depressed. In a lot of cases, they would be like, their humors are unbalanced, so in order to fix this, we're gonna leach all their blood out of them and hope that that heals them. Because, of course, as everyone knows, the spirit is four humors, and you just have to add or subtract until they go back to normal again. Thankfully, we don't think this way anymore, for the most part. But then treatment within asylums, like I had said, was not always the best. And again, McLean was, by Dorothea Dix, mentioned to be top of the line. But even in the sort of setup of that, we still know that they had restraints. We still know that they weren't necessarily acting ethically in every single case. And this was, again, a new thing. It was new that you could just send members of your family here. So I would like to pull up something I think is fantastic. Here are reasons in 1850 why you could go to the asylum. Some of my favorites, okay? Novel reading. Don't you dare read a book, you're going to the asylum. Are you lazy? That's right, you're going to the asylum. How about imaginary female trouble? What does this mean? You also have woman trouble. I don't know if that's trouble that the women have, or if you're a man and you're not able to get a date, you have women. I have no idea. There's some reasonable ones. For example, where is it? The war. If you're in the war, you're going to the asylum. Sorry, I don't make the rules. You have overaction of the mind and overstudy of religion. So don't be too religious, and also do not think too much. You're gonna go to the asylum. What do we have over here that's pretty good? Asthma. I'm sorry, you're going to the asylum. Political excitement. We have documentation of one lawyer who was packed away for political excitement. I guess he got too involved in a case and they said, well, that's grounds for insanity. There you go, we're gonna pack you away in there. Of course, greediness, don't be greedy, pretty fair. Then you have things like sexual derangement. I will say that masturbation is a thing that gets you packed away pretty fast. This one just says masturbation for 30 years, so I guess if you do it for 29 years, you're okay, but tack on that one extra year and you're screwed, you're going straight to the asylum. So this is the situation that we have. So whenever I say, we don't know why they would have brought Lot into the asylum, these are the grounds for what they're saying makes you deserve to be packed up. Then, if I had it down here, maybe I don't, they had a couple different reasons for why it was okay, too, like what they considered to be grounds for going insane. And the most popular ones were, again, really weird things. Like, again, I think masturbation was a big one. That was one of the top reasons why people were said to have grounds of insanity. Or my microphone dies. Oh, it's not, it's back, it's okay. They had other ones. There were like 4 big ones, and I can't find them in my notes. But I promise you that they were sort of arbitrary, and you would look at someone nowadays and be like, well, I actually don't think you should go to the asylum for that, but you know, different, oh wait, here it is. It was in my notes. Okay, so here are great things that they would say were grounds for insanity in the 1830s, yeah. So this is a little bit after Lot goes in and he dies, and his cause of death is listed as chronic insanity. So what does that mean? Well, I'm hoping that between this sort of thing, we can get closer to what they would have considered chronic insanity. And I'd like to start by thinking about the grounds for insanity. So yeah, insane ancestors. So whatever we define as insane ancestors, if you had that, you could be insane. There you go, I did put that one there. Intemperance. So if you behave intemperately, tough luck. And then if you're pregnant, and I think this meant also like any sort of postpartum depression, or it really seemed to be the after stages of pregnancy when you're sort of healing from it. But I guess also the lead up, like, do you want to have pickles with Nutella on them? That's like a cause of insanity? I don't know. So what we're defining already as the basis of what's okay is very iffy. So in terms of Lot, to just bring it back to him, our main question then is what had happened. And when I say we don't know, I really do mean we don't know, but these types of things bring us closer to saying, what would the rationale have been? Why would we think that that might be the case? And how can we then move on from that point? So the next thing I'd like to talk about is love and lives, which again mean a couple of things. In my mind, it's people who are not doing that whole angel of the house thing. You have a daughter and she's like, you know what, I don't want to be cherubic and sit on your knee and whatever. I actually want to go get a job and I'm going to go do that, and goodbye, guys. So there is that. And then also to talk about what romantic friendships and what homosexuality would have looked like in this particular era. And Tony Rotendo has a wonderful book, of course, on men across America, basically, and but he touches on that in it, and it is a fantastic resource. So if this interests you, that is a wonderful place to continue to read. So early documentation of this was actually in women for Boston and Wellesley marriages. So the idea of a Boston marriage that would happen is that two women who were from Boston, not necessarily though, because you see Boston marriages being applied to people in Ireland, like these two women, the ladies of Langdon, but you have the idea that both of them want to be financially self-sufficient, both of them want to live lives, because basically if you married a man, you get sucked into the Coventry laws. And coverture would then take away your being as a person in yourself. I don't think women could have like even bank accounts or something until like, I want to say the 1970s, but this is just off the noggin, so could be wrong. But yeah, it's been rough, and Coventry or curvature would then take away one's being as a personhood and just completely absorb it into that of her husband. So if you were a woman and you thought, wow, I really don't want to be the same person as my husband legally, I'd actually like to be my own person, you would see women do this. So the two of them could go in together on an apartment, they could live together, and then they wouldn't have to depend on anybody else for financial stability. And this was seen in the upper class for women. I promise I am going somewhere with this. And you have examples like that. But how does this tie into men? Because when we're thinking about Lot, we also see that he wasn't married, and in his own personal records, he never really talks about women. He is very focused on his job, on visiting people, on doing these other things, and not subscribing to this ideal of you're going to go get married, you're going to have a family, and you are then going to absorb another person into your legal personhood. So in a couple of cases, we have some of our favorite people. This is Ralph Waldo Emerson and Henry David Thoreau. They are fantastic, both huge parts of the Transcendentalist movement in Concord. And we know that Emerson spoke here in the Follen Church, and he was close with the Robbins family as well. So you have these guys, and so the idea for a romantic friendship at the time was we have to remember that the way we define acts that would constitute homosexuality or something that's homoromantic is very different from what was considered acceptable or even common back in the day. So you would have a situation where something that we would consider, like if you see people cuddled together, like two men just snuggling, maybe for us we would consider that something that would constitute homoromantic or even potentially indicate feelings. But back then, you see documentation of these close upper class romantic friendships in which those behaviors would be not uncommon, but then you would see them both get married, wind up having their own families. But meanwhile, when they're on the younger side, they have these very passionate correspondences. So the reason I bring both of these guys up is because they have poems that were written sort of in the spirit of that sort of romantic friendship period. Now, I will show you those in just a moment, but the next two people I would like to talk about are Nathaniel Hawthorne to the left and Herman Melville to the right. Now, Herman Melville, of course, was the famous author of Moby Dick, and there are correspondences between Hawthorne and Melville that suggest they had something happening, whether that would constitute a romantic friendship or whether that would constitute something else. It's not for us to say because we were not of the time, but we do have Melville's letters. We have 11 collectively, 10 are of Melville, 1 is of Hawthorne. And Melville has some interesting things to say. So I don't have his letters pulled up here, I will admit, but this is another example where you can check into it. You can see how they were talking about each other, how they conceptualized their relationship to one another. And again, it evades our classification, but it's interesting to see this shift in the norms over time. Now, you did have people of the lower class who would have had homoromantic or even homosexual natures, but it's not the same structured intimacy that you necessarily see in these upper class romantic friendships. Now, in terms of how one considered same-sex relationships in general, especially ones of a more sexual nature, you had different conceptions. So it would be called the crime without a name. That was a good one that they would call it, sodomy. I think classic, right guys, sodomy. And then you also had, what was the other one? Just because I want to make sure I have it right. Crime against nature. Oh yeah, classic. But the thing is, crime against nature, which I believe was put into the law around here in 1812, around then, crime against nature could include any variety of things, also meaning like bestiality, other types of things that they were like, you shouldn't do that, stop that. So if someone were pulled aside for crime against nature, it's not necessarily same-sex relationships. It could be something else that still falls into that category of we shouldn't do it. By the way, 12 states actually don't have their no sodomy clause repealed, and Massachusetts is one of them. Interestingly enough. And the rest of them are in the South and then Michigan. So I'm afraid Massachusetts is not winning with that one, but it's okay. I think there's, nationally you're fine to do that. So these were, two things. This is Ralph Waldo Emerson's poem, and that one down there is Henry David Thoreau's. A little bit of context for both of these. The first one is Ralph Waldo Emerson is in college, and he's got this journal, and he's having a great time in his journal, and he has a friend whose name is Martin Gay, which is topical because he's writing very romantically about how dear Gay is to him, how he's like, I just wish he would catch my eye. I promise that's not an exaggeration, it's really along those lines, I just can't remember exactly what it is. But then he writes this, which is interesting, and this is in Jonathan Catt's book, The Gay American History, it's called something like that. But first of all, Frodmer, that's not a real person. And the drama of the Friends doesn't exist, so whatever it is, this is not a quotation as it would somehow seem to be. If you frame something as a quotation, you sort of take a step back and you don't have to consider yourself responsible for the content of this. Now, it does say Malcolm, but Catt supposes that Malcolm is actually his friend Martin as sort of a similar name, so he's not actively writing this about his friend, but he is writing this about his friend. So you have it here. And yeah, you start off with the first line, Malcolm, I love thee more than women love. So, very interesting. You've got that. Then you have Thoreau's over here. This is called Sympathy. Thoreau had been spending times at the dock with two people a little bit younger than him. He was 22 years old at the time. The boy was called Edmund and the girl was called Eliza. And Henry Thoreau, he was thinking, people typically attributed this to him writing about Eliza. But it's interesting because it is very clearly male pronouns through the entire thing, as well as referring to a boy. So nowadays, I think the general consensus is it probably was not talking about Eliza, and it was perhaps talking about her brother. Again, it is indeterminate to say, but once again, you have a strong opening to this. Lately, alas, I knew a gentle boy whose features all were cast in virtue's mold. And one she had designed for beauty's toy, but after manned him for her own stronghold. The meter's a little interesting there, but it is very pretty, and it is the start of a much longer poem. There are more sections of it than I could necessarily include here. So the reason I bring this up, too, is because our conceptions of these things were so different. I mean, the words homosexual and bisexual didn't come around until the 1860s and the 1870s. So this is your basis. And then when you're thinking about Lot, what do we conclude? Because now we have this background, we have what constituted mental illness. Did he have some sort of a nervous breakdown that could have sent him there? Maybe. Could he have had some sort of same-sex relationship? Maybe. We don't know the answer to that. And we'll just have to keep looking to find out more. The final person I'd like to talk about is Julia Robbins. And so Julia is interesting, as I sort of already talked about, because she isn't interested in pursuing that angel of the house basis. And you can only imagine, like Kathy had said, this causes tension between her and Hannah, because as Hannah's getting older, as she has older family members, and Hannah starts needing to be cared for, again, her deaf sister Hannah Maria is still living at home, you start wondering, when is my incredibly beautiful and self-sufficient daughter going to come back and help us out? And the answer is, she was very remiss to do so in the end, because she wound up having a job. She was at the school for girls, she traveled around, and then she winds up working in the Lowell Mills, and she is a carpet designer. So she studies how to design carpets, and then she goes and does that. Now, we do have instances where she was flirting with the idea of being proposed to or of potentially getting married, but it doesn't seem like in her own mind she necessarily wanted to take herself away from this life where she is independent, she is sufficient, and she's part of the abolitionist movement here too. So she's going around, she's signing petitions, she's getting other people involved. It's this big piece of work, basically, that she's doing. And of course, Hannah, her mother, also was signing petitions or helping with the abolitionist movement. But in Hannah's own mind, to some degree, I think she likely had the idea that she had nevertheless engaged in this long-term relationship. She had had children, and now her daughter, why is she not doing these things? Why is she not coming back to help out in the way a parent might expect? And so you have this sort of tension, and eventually Julia does get married, and she moves out to Concord. She lives there for the remainder of her life, but in the meantime, she's broken away from this stereotypical mold. So when we're talking about gender nonconformity, it's not just in physical presentation, which I assume you really would have gotten in trouble for back in the day, but it's also in not conforming to these basic household molds. So that's why whenever I'm talking about them, you think about Hannah Maria, who she was never married, she lived at home all of her life, but she was a sufficient person. She lived to be in her 60s. Like, that is a fully lived life. Then you have Lot, who wasn't married. He had his own business. He was traveling around. He was successful. And then you have Julia, who was part of these huge movements, speaking out as a woman, setting everything up, and she too did not fit into this general expectation of what a standard Victorian family was supposed to do. So with that, that concludes my talk, but thank you all so much for coming. I'll hand it over to Rosemary.
Thank you very much, Amelia. Oh, that was great, and I wish we knew more, and I wish we had found the letters that explain some of these things. When Amelia and I were talking recently, and she had found a lot of bills of what seems like extravagant spending on Lot's part, and I suggested to her, could that be a reason to put your son in the, but we don't know. And really, there's a certain mystery connected with this. But Rosemary Trowbridge is going to organize us into a brief discussion group.
Okay, if you look at your handout, the back has some guidelines for discussion. So what we're gonna do is, once I finish with this, we're gonna break into groups of like 3 and really spread out. And so you can talk among yourselves, and we'll come back and you'll have a chance to ask Amelia questions, or just any reflections you have to yourself from the whole project.
Okay.
But we're not, each group's not reporting back until we're lots.
These are the small group questions. We could actually kind of divide you up to turn your chairs around.
Just some suggestions for working in a group. Okay, introduce yourself and tell us why you came. My favorite one, the first time we had a conversation, was the man I was sitting next to said, well, my friend is a speaker, so I came to support it. I really don't want to be here. What surprised,
Yeah, we'll move down.
what surprised you or caught your attention today? And what do you take away to think about more?
Oh.
If you have experiences with ideas that share related to what you.
Oh, I might as well just stay here.
Meanwhile, what about group agreements? So where it says guidelines, we'll share time to allow everyone to contribute. Extroverts may need to hold back a bit, and introverts may need to step up a bit. We will listen to understand and refrain from interrupting. We'll offer others the benefit of the doubt and make room for vulnerability and for bravery in trying new things. So is that okay for people? That's something we can handle? Sure. Okay, great. Okay, so if you just break up the groups, just push your chairs apart, so we can sit like groups of 3, and we'll join you too. So we have about 15 minutes, or maybe 12 minutes.
All right, you want to start? Why did you come today?
Hey guys, so if you have questions, feel free to ask them. If you'd like to share something, feel free to do so as well.
Was there any research for the song that you really loved but felt like you couldn't work in just because it didn't fit the themes?
I think more of the Lot stuff, honestly, because I've spent the last couple days, honestly, seeing Jessie in the archives, and she has done a ton of looking into Lot stuff as well. And so having conversations with her, especially in terms of the music, the folk music that he's chosen, specific dances, I just wish I had more time to figure out like what specifically he composed, because I feel like there's so much more that could be said about that.
You're always welcome.
Thank you.
Come to the archives.
I will.
That was a
Surprise.
new find. So we're very excited that you found that. That was a new find because I can't read music. So I'm excited to explore that more. So there's always new things being discovered, which is very exciting.
Do you know when the term, do you have any idea when the term deaf and dumb went out of usage?
That was in circulation for quite a while. I think you start seeing that leave a little bit more. I want to say the 1880s through the 1920s, it starts to be phased out, and then you see other forms, like you get more hearing impairment. I'm forgetting what the other ones are, but there's a whole slew of them that are just completely outdated. Nowadays, the typical terms that people would use are deaf. You can see it usually with like a lowercase d and a capital D. The lowercase is for someone who's auditorily impaired, and the big D is the whole deaf community. So you can be part of that without being deaf, and then hard of hearing is pretty common. But I think those two are the typical ones that you would see today. Yeah.
In your research with Hannah Mariah, did anything pop up that could indicate that maybe she became deaf later in life due to illness or an accident?
Not that I could tell. It seems like she was pretty much deaf from the get-go, because even in her early life, I didn't see that she was having the same education necessarily as her sisters were, which, if anything, it was like she could have been born and then had scarlet fever really young or something that takes you out, but I don't know for sure.
Yeah, as a follow-up to that question,
Yes.
are there any other, is there any record of any of her ancestors or her descendants, other people in the Robbins family tree being deaf?
Not that I could find either. I think further back, the documentation is sort of iffy on if they would have had a deaf relative. But Hannah Mariah didn't have children. And then from there, I don't think any of her siblings had children who were deaf. So I'm going to say probably not, or at least not that is documented that I've read.
This may be a question as much for Jesse as for you. Like, how many legal box filings full of Robbins family stuff is there? How, you know, what volume of material?
20 and counting.
There's 26 currently, and we just got a donation I was just talking about with Kathy recently with more material. I mean, it's probably our fullest collection that but through volunteer work, we were able to completely create a finding aid and catalog all the materials. So now it's really well organized for researchers when they come in, so it's easier.
And you said a donation, a monetary donation to do the cataloging?
No,
or
it's a physical donation of more papers.
Okay. And where are those coming from?
This particular donation was from Maine, and it's from
Oh,
Ellen Stone,
ancestor,
the second.
Descendants.
Yeah. How they got this, I have no idea, but I literally just opened the box yesterday, and you and I will need to talk further. This is some lot stuff.
Oh, that's cool.
So it's continuing to grow, and
That's so cool.
puzzle pieces are coming together, and maybe we'll have a whole puzzle someday.
That's awesome. And you store this at the Lyceum or at the Lexington Historical Association?
It's at the Lexington History Museum's in our new archival building at Monroe. It's all exciting.
Footnote.
Oh, yes.
I need to plug that Jesse's, the Lexington Historical Society, now Lexington Historic Museums, has a state-of-the-art archival facility, which is unique for a town this size. And we are incredibly fortunate to have someone as skilled and experienced as Jesse and have this facility available. It's an incredible story.
Thanks, Jeff. I didn't pay him to say that.
Is it open to the public, or do you need to be a researcher of some kind too?
We usually do appointments because I take care of all 5 properties that are under the museum's care. So usually we do appointments to make sure I'm in the building, and especially when it's a small staff and volunteers. So you can reach out to me on my card if you're interested. We can send an appointment. Thanks, Jeff.
Anybody else? I wanted to mention that, you know, in Mary Keenan's book, Julia's struggle with her mother is explained to the degree that we know, from the documents. But Julia does go back and visit Lot in McLean, and that says something about whatever he did, whether he bought too many shirts or I don't know what he did, but he did something that made his father probably decide to commit him. And again, that's a mystery. Maybe these new papers will help us understand it. But he wasn't completely cut off from family members, but we only know that Julia visited him. So I don't know. For me, the personal side of the family is also really interesting because it's before the germ, they know about germ theories, there's outdoor plumbing, they're dealing with the dusty roads, and not very good, the medical and legal professions weren't really given tests. It's, America was disorganized and agricultural and fairly primitive, and people were trying to move towards a more modern scientific world, and that happened throughout the 19th century. But psychiatry didn't really exist very much, and economics and all kinds of things that are late 19th century inventions. So when we look at these people, and of course we're going to laugh at some of their categories, but these are American peasants of a pre-industrial era moving into an industrial time and a scientific time, and they don't know things that we know. So I don't know. As a historian, I always feel like you got to see it from their world, and I just, that's we talk about that. And Julia was kind of more modern and antsy than her sisters, and they're always trying to pull her back and say, Julia, be the angel of the house, chill. Please. And yet we look at her very sympathetically because we see things that way. But anyway, Thank you so much, Amelia. It's so fun.
Thank you.
Thank you.